Wonderful. So we can go ahead and
Good
pivot
afternoon,
into
and
the
please
topic.
take your seats. We're about to begin our next panel, the energy panel. I'm the editor for Energy for Reuters. My name is Dimitri, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. I'm delighted to invite on stage our guests, our host, Mr. Saad Al-Kaabi, who is the president and chief executive of Qatar Petroleum, and recently the Minister of State for Energy Affairs. Welcome on stage. Hello, Mr. Al-Kaabi. To the left from Mr. Al-Kaabi is the chief executive of Italian oil major, Claudio Descalzi. Hello, Claudio, good to see you. And to the left from Claudio, Yuri Centurion, who is the Secretary General of Gas Exporting Countries Forum. The topic of our session is energy, but I think the organizers have really come up with a very good headline for the session: New Age Energy Policy, a Balancing Act. And all you need to know about the Balancing Act is that our session discussing oil and gas will be starting straight after the session which was discussing the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. This is what the balancing act of today's energy world really is. And just our discussion comes against the backdrop when oil has become one of the most volatile asset classes in the world. It's probably on par there with Bitcoin, with prices fluctuating between $130 per barrel and $27 per barrel in the space of a few months. And of course, that makes planning incredibly difficult. It's another balancing act. And of course, it comes against the backdrop of economic wars between the United States and China and other problems. And President Trump has become a major factor of volatility in the energy market. So energy policy, as some of our OPEC sources are saying, energy policy is being done via Twitter these days. So that's the backdrop of our discussion. And of course, I would like to probably kick it off with the hottest topic of the past month, which is Mr. Al-Kaabi announcing Qatar's decision to leave OPEC. But just before I ask a question, to tell you a bit of a story, like journalists like arriving to Vienna a few days in advance to just speak to sources, prepare a little bit, understand how the meeting is going to be developing. So if the meeting is on Friday, Monday is usually a dead day. Well, little did we know that our day will be ruined last Monday. So we started running around like headless chickens because after 57 years, Qatar quit OPEC. So, Mr. Al-Kaabi, could you possibly tell us how did that decision crystallize and what was the real trigger?
Good afternoon, everybody. First, I'd like to thank really the organizers for inviting us to this distinguished panel. Regarding the OPEC decision, it started actually a few months before the OPEC meeting or the decision was taken. I had attended, I think, 3 or 4 meetings previously with the ex-minister, Dr. Al-Sada, and basically, my observation was that we didn't have much say in what's happening in the OPEC as Qatar. We're a very small producer. The major players have a bigger say, and we are really not involved in the decision-making is one element. But then looking really at the pros and cons of the benefits of staying versus leaving, I was contemplating that myself with some of my team in the latest meeting in June. And later on, I had a discussion here internally with His Highness the Emir and whether something like that can be studied and we can look at the pros and cons and look at it objectively and take a decision whether we want to leave or not. His Highness, for those of you that don't know him, is a very forward-thinking leader. He is young. He wants to do the right thing for Qatar. His only objective is to do what's right for Qatar long term. I mean, there is no other objective. And so looking at really that, we looked at the pros and cons of staying. And really, the negatives were more than the positives in staying with OPEC as a small producer. You couple that with our strategy long-term and looking at gas as the predominant growth in Qatar, and internationally looking at both oil and gas as the two expansion areas that we'll be looking at in Qatar Petroleum. So it didn't fit for us to sit as part of this OPEC group, if you will. And then people talk about what are the negatives, and there are many that we saw that didn't benefit us. Some I've seen in journalists politicize it and so on. I can absolutely tell you that this has nothing to do with politics. There are political consequences because it's really part of a group of countries, but the decision was not political at all, and it was done based on an objective look at this. I had read also the NOPEC as one of the things that we looked at. Definitely, I mean, when we analyze anything, we look at the commercial side, the technical side, the political side, the consequences that could come out of that, whether it's in these elements, in addition to looking at definitely the legal side. And NOPEC is a legal risk that's available or that's out there if it gets approved by the U.S. legislators. And they are contemplating looking at that or doing that. That's not the only, but it is one of them.
It was one of the risks. Well, we will come back to the NOPEC question, but can I ask you, what did His Highness say when you proposed the cons? And how did it?
At the end, the pros and cons tipped it towards, I mean, the scale tipped towards the leaving was a better outcome for Qatar, and His Highness wanted to do what's best for Qatar and took the decision that we should leave.
And in terms of, I mean, did you discuss how it fits with the broader issue of Qatar's current national security and the fact that you are experiencing an economic blockade by your neighbors? Did it make the decision maybe easier?
I don't think it relates to national security at all. It's just part of a group that cartels or discusses supply-demand and agrees on a certain limit on on oil production or reduction of level of production or increase of level of production depending on supply and demand, with the objective to stabilize the price in a range that is reasonable for consumers and sellers. So that's the objective. So national security doesn't come into play for us. If the blockade helped us in one thing, maybe it would have been, it was easier since we're not part of that group to take a decision to leave. But other than that, it really didn't have a big effect.
Claudia, if you were the head of QP, would you have left OPEC as well?
No, I had to think about E&I first. That is really a tough task. And, QP is very rich, a lot of gas, a lot of oil, and wonderful countries. I think that, and they are facing the crisis in a very good way. You have to consider that the world needs energy, and they need clean energy. The energy needs are increasing in 25 years. We need about 30% more. And we still have a lot of countries without energy. So energy is quite important issue. So I think that this is not a political decision, as the minister said, but it's clear that for us, for the world, what is important that Qatar continue to deliver gas as they are doing, and now they are increasing the capacity. So I think that is very important. And going back to what you said at the very beginning, clearly in our industry we are unfortunately quite used to volatility. In the last 4 years, I think we had a very strong volatility and the price, geopolitics, but all the oil business demonstrated that in few years, we were able to reduce our full cash neutrality for more than $110 per barrel to around $50, $60 per barrel. So, and we increased production. At least we have been able to increase production, also reducing capex and reducing the cash neutrality. So I think that we had the capability to adapt ourselves. But clearly, from the other side, we have to deliver energy. We have to deliver energy, and we have to deliver clean energy. Gas is one part of the solution. For that reason, I think that the role of Qatar is crucial. It's really a center of gravity, also because the future will be LNG more than pipes. We know that in the next 15 years, LNG is going to grow drastically, double practically from 40, 45% to 75%. And that means also that we can also have a balance between the different markets, and that will be crucial.
We'll certainly come back to the LNG discussion a bit later, but I would like just to carry on and probably follow up with you, Yuri, on what Mr. Al-Kabi just said, that part of his major, one of the considerations when pulling out of OPEC was the looming NOPEC legislation in the United States. I mean, you are the Secretary General of a Gas Exporters Countries Forum, which we usually among journalists call a gas OPEC. But in fact, I mean, one of the biggest reproaches has always been that your organization is not like OPEC. It's a bit of a talking shop. So once you gain more powers, it would be really good. You will become really relevant. But in an environment when NOPEC is looming on the horizon, I mean, what's your strategy? Have you done an analysis at all of the NOPEC legislation and whether it's relevant for you?
Thanks a lot for your question. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for the organizers who arranged this energy panel, because energy is of paramount significance for Gas Exporting Countries Forum. Speaking about developments and achievements in energy markets, of course, all the developments and all achievements are under our careful and comprehensive monitoring. I can say we are considering such kind of developments very carefully and comprehensively. And you mentioned about new legislations, about new rules and regulations. Of course, it's a matter and the substance of our special interest and attention. Speaking about APEC and GCF, some differences, I would like to say that we are quite and completely different organizations, because APEC is regulating markets to some extent, trying to install quotas for member countries and so on and so forth. Speaking about gas exporting countries in compliance with our constituent documents, and among them I would like to mention the statute of GCF, we do not regulate any markets. We ensure the cooperation between our member countries. And our mission is to support the sovereign rights of our member countries upon their natural resources. I mean natural gas resources, national resources, and of course, to support and to maximize value in the benefit of their people from the handling of natural gas and so on and so forth.
Yuri, have you actually analyzed NOPEC risks?
Speaking about APEC, I would like to say that we are cooperating with APEC. We are collaborating.
NOPEC risks, the risks of the NOPEC legislation.
So speaking about these risks, I can say that so far it's not clear up to the hilt about any risks. As already mentioned, we are considering quite comprehensively these new rules and legislations. And of course, we are consulting with our member countries in order to understand better, to realize better would-be risks and would-be consequences of this non-APEC legislation, which is under elaboration in our, I can say, competing countries. And of course, we have got specialized bodies at the Secretariat, and the duty, the responsibility of the mentioned specialized bodies is to scrutinize and study carefully all these developments.
Gotcha, understood. Just to draw a line under the OPEC discussion, very quick question. Claudia, do you think Trump will try to kill OPEC, and will he succeed in doing that?
No, I don't think that Trump wants to kill OPEC also because he's so focused on the US activity and the economy, the industrial things, and clearly from his point of view, he likes to have very low price because for the consumers, they need low price to develop and to increase the investment. I think that OPEC is not finished at all. OPEC is there, but starting from a couple of years ago, we are experiencing a different kind of assessment. I mean, there is OPEC and non-OPEC. And, you know, after 3 years of no decision about the oil price or production cut, when Russia intervened, they decided to have a production cut. So OPEC is looking for additional help outside. So maybe there is an expansion of the OPEC concept. And I think that that is the evolution. I think that if we need clearly a less volatility in the oil price, and that means that everybody has to give a contribution. And that maybe that will be the evolution of OPEC.
Mr. Al-Kaabi, what's your view on the subject?
On which a lot of subjects.
Will President Trump try to and succeed in trying to dissolve OPEC in one way or another?
I think we'll all agree that President Trump is consistently unpredictable. So I think it's very difficult to predict what President Trump will do. I think he will do what he thinks is in the best interest of the US, and I think anything is possible.
Yuri, you are from Russia, so you're allowed to say whatever you want about President Trump. So what's your view on the subject?
Frankly speaking, you see, I'm representing right now the interests of 19 GCF countries, and Russia, one of our member countries, just one of our member countries, one from 19 countries. Speaking about our organization, we are purely economic organization. We are not a political organization, and that's why it's rather difficult for us to express our political assessments upon the decisions made in some countries across the globe.
Yes or no? Will he succeed or he won't succeed? Just tell me.
Please, you need clear answer. So I would say that I join my colleagues from the panel in the assessments because Mr. Al-Kaabi is our chief, I can say. He represents the key member country of GCF.
I feel there's a job for you waiting at the Kremlin, definitely. You're very diplomatic. So just to switch subjects a little bit, Claudio, if I could... of course,
I was part of the team that actually created Gas Forum with His Excellency Al-Atiyah and with Russia, and originally it came with Iran, Russia, and Algeria. And then the first meeting to actually put together the GCF was in Russia, and then we actually asked to host the forum. So I think it's very important to make a distinction. I think that His Excellency the Secretary General tried to describe, which is the difference between OPEC and GCF. So the Gas Forum is basically looking at supply-demand, looking at interaction between the gas exporters, and looking at data and analysis of markets and future trends. It has nothing to do with any kind of curtailing of production or putting quotas and so on. It's actually practically not possible. It's not as fungible as oil. It's not as transportable as oil because you have gas, you have LNG, you have GTL, you have different forms. And these are and priced at different formulas and so on. So the Gas Forum, it was intentionally called a forum, not to be called by journalists Gas OPEC. So I just want to make sure. So therefore, the NOPEC and the legal side is not something we worry about in the Gas Forum.
Yeah, and may long stay like this, because otherwise we might see new tweets from President Trump, something along the lines, Gas OPEC dissolve immediately or something.
Who's the biggest gas producer?
Claudia, a question to you. I remember back in 2015 in Davos when the oil price crashed to $30 per barrel after OPEC decided not to cut production. Well, effectively, it was Saudi Minister Ali Al-Naimi who decided not to cut production. You were very critical of the decision. You said OPEC should have cut so all producers and companies in the world can balance their budget and the world gets enough oil. So ultimately, they were forced to cut to stabilize the prices, and everyone was sort of saying they played a positive role. But what actually happened is that the US production kept growing. If anyone said, like 3-4 years ago, that the United States will be producing 15 million barrels per day, people would have said, you're probably out of your mind. Now people are talking about 20 million barrels per day, so probably a fifth of global production at some point. So this growth seems to be completely unstoppable. Is OPEC losing the battle to US shale?
First, I don't think that is unstoppable because there is a limit in terms of the percentage in terms of reserves and production. You have to consider that the unconventional reserves represent 6% of the overall worldwide reserves, and more than 85% is in the end of the OPEC, we can say, association, and mainly in the Middle East. Then also in terms of production, now we are producing 100 million barrels per day, and from the shale we have 5-6 million barrels per day. So we are in a different kind of situation and quite isolated, because what the US is producing is for US, because it's growing in terms of business and from an industrial point of view. So I don't think that the US production alone can counterbalance a lack of investment. We have to remember that we have about 6 million per day on average, yearly average of depletion rate. So we lose every year 6 million barrels per day, and we have an increased demand of oil, of gas and oil, but now we are talking about oil. So I don't think that the US alone can support or balance the overall worldwide production. I think we need investment. We were in 2013, before the crisis, we were investing $800 billion for increase our production, and we need about 500 billion just to counterbalance the depletion rate, so maintenance and infilling of the existing field. So it's clear that if we continue like that, we are going down. Now, we have a balance from a physical point of view between demand and supply. Last year, we have a gap, a deficit, so the demand was higher then. Then clearly, we had the Iran issue, we have some lack of production in Libya. So we have other aspects that we have to consider. We are losing about 4 million barrels per day due to geopolitics. So clearly, we need investment. Clearly, to invest, and to invest in a very efficient way, you need the right price. And the investment in the Permian, for example, now with the new technology have a very low break-even, so they can continue. In other areas, for the deep offshore or ultra-deep offshore, is much more difficult. So I'm convinced that we need the right price to continue to invest, because, as I said, the world needs energy. And clearly, worldwide, we need a sort of regulator, because we cannot continue to have a up and down in the price. And every time we invest billion and billion for then recover in 10, 20, 40 years. So we take a risk. And you can take a risk only if you have some stability in the oil price. So that is always true. Clearly now, we have a lower price. Before we need $100 per barrel. Now we can live with $60, $65 per barrel on average. So that is
the US doesn't seem to be playing ball with you. They just keep producing as much as they can.
I think that now they are not increasing production also because there is a bottleneck in terms of transportation for a while. So the average production from the Permian and from the shale oil is always at the same level. They can increase, but they can maybe compensate the depletion rate. And then we have to you need to consider the growth rate that we have.
Sure, understood. Mr. Al-Kabi, it would be unfair to ask you whether OPEC is losing the game to US shale, because actually you're doing quite the opposite. You've just left OPEC and you're going to the United States, and you are investing heavily in the United States. I know we had a chance to speak earlier today, and you said you might be investing up to $20 billion in the United States in the next few years. So looks like you are going on the opposite side of the game, or you're going global, actually.
No, we are, as we had mentioned in the past, we have a strategy of growing our production from 4.8 to 6.5 million barrels oil equivalent. We think that's a conservative strategy in my view, so that should be updated soon. But,
how soon?
Soon, you'll hear about it. But we're working very hard. We're already almost at that target, if you will, with what we've what we have on the table, and there are a lot of things we're working on that are, in the final stages. As you know, in the US, we have very large investments. We have Golden Pass LNG terminal that we're contemplating moving forward with our partners. So we're in the final stage of really assessing that to take a final investment decision, and that should be coming really in the next few weeks to months, maximum in a few months. We should take a final decision, and if that goes ahead, that's an increase of about 60 million tons that will be of LNG export that will be part of, in addition to the 110 that we already announced we'd be reaching in 5 years or so. In the US, of course, with the LNG export that we will also have upstream position in gas, oil, conventional, non-conventional. We think that the US has a huge potential in production going forward and for a very long time. And therefore, we're looking to invest there. We reckon, somewhere north of $20 billion will be invested in the next 5 years in the US in different projects that we're working on, as I said, in different areas, conventional, non-conventional, and Golden Pass is really the big LNG export project that we're working on.
But help me understand a little bit. Everyone knows that the reserves in Qatar are the cheapest in the world, and you have so much of those that there's no, you can't see the end. It just seems to be that field will be able to produce forever. So why going somewhere where, in the United States, where assets are, everyone is saying, well, most people say they're incredibly overpriced, and invest in places like Argentina, for instance?
No, you see, that's true if you're not investing here, but we're expanding, and you have to remember that just in 1991, we started the first gas production at 0.8 billion standard cubic feet a day. So where we are today is we are at almost 23 billion standard cubic feet a day. Where we're going to be reaching is around 30 billion standard cubic feet a day. So there is an exponential growth in what we're doing with what you call an infinite reserve. It's not everything has an end, but I think we're really utilizing our reserves. But the way we did it is very methodical and making sure that we ascertain the reserves and make things in a stepwise fashion that we're very certain about what we're doing. And, it's different when it's a country that you need to generate revenue over the long term versus a company that just looks at the interest of the company for shareholders and quarterly dividends. So QP is looking nationally at long-term growth and long-term strategy for production that can be sustainable for generations. And externally, we're looking to add on to that capability that we have externally to basically expand our horizon outside the country. So we're called a national oil company. I see ourselves as really transforming to more of an international oil company and an international player. And we only go for viable projects and long-term projects. All the projects we talk about, Claudio, if you talk to him, or any of the executives, you plan a project today, you're going to see it produce in maybe 5 years, and then it will be running for another 30 years or 25 years. So we are long-term planners and think of long horizons. So you have to really broaden your spectrum if you really want to grow in the oil and gas business. And that's why we're growing all over the place.
Maybe a more of a general question. It's people have for years underestimated the U.S. shale oil output potential. Even the U.S. government itself has been constantly revising their own forecasts, saying we got it wrong. Actually, the output is booming much more than we had expected. And do you think, and when you listen to people like Gazprom from Russia, they say, well, look, US LNG, it will never reach the European markets. It's not going to happen. It's so expensive, it will only go to premium Asian markets. So our position in Europe is stable. Do you think people are generally massively underestimating the potential of US LNG exports? Like, we wake up like 10 years down the road and they control a huge chunk of LNG supply?
No, LNG from the US is a reality, whether you like it or not, it's already there. I mean, they're producing LNG, they're exporting at competitive, and they're competitive. They're able to compete into Europe and to different places. They've even been able to compete in Asia. And it depends on the price of oil. I mean, because you're buying from Henry Hub and reselling onwards, and it depends on the price of oil at very high price oil prices. And a few years back, every buyer you talk to want a Henry Hub link because the oil price was $120, $100, and most of these contracts are linked to crude. But if you look at the US at $50 and so on, it doesn't compete as well as you know, at high prices. But US LNG, I mean, there is an abundance of gas. It is at a very cheap price. The question is, at what point, at what tipping point you'll have basically the volume is enough pulled out of the US in LNG that will affect the domestic prices in the US and then will impede further growth in LNG export.
And we will see tweets from Trump again.
Sorry?
And then we will see tweets from Trump again.
I think by that time, Trump will not be there. I mean, I think you're talking about maybe 10 years from now or a few years from now. But there will be a tipping point where, you know, because people are planning LNG projects in the US. You know, when it reaches 100 million tons, 150 million tons, you know, you're going to pull, you know, 6 to 15 billion cubic feet a day out of a market. You know, it's going to affect prices. But, you know, how fast can they still keep drilling? Are the reserves good enough because all the good stuff is being drilled. But there is more expensive stuff, so it's not infinite. I mean, but everything is at a cost.
Claudio, what's your view? I mean, do people massively underestimate the potential of US LNG?
No, I don't think so, but I look at this from the European perspective. You know, in Europe, first we have a gas hub price that is increasing in terms of volume, and that means that is the link from oil price. And now the differential between the TTF, that is the European gas hub, and the Henry Hub is of about $4. That is not enough, really, for the US gas to come and make good profit to Europe. Europe needs diversification because it's growing and grew a lot in the last couple of years. And we have the possibility to diversify because we have North Africa. We have a lot of gas in North Africa that can really, again, can reach the European hub very easily at a very low price in terms of operating costs, development costs, and transportation costs, much faster and cheaper than the American LNG. Then we have Russia, so we cannot live without the Russian gas. That is clear. But overall now, Europe is reaching 480, 500 billion cubic meters per year of consumptions, and from the Russia we can have about 190, 200 billion. So the rest is LNG, and the rest is North Africa and Middle East, and that is for Europe. I think that the LNG. American LNG is based on Henry Hub, and I'm sure that if they start exporting more and more, the Henry Hub price is going up. That means that also they need a very good price in terms of buyers, also in Far East. And what we saw in 2012, when the price in Far East reached $18 per million BTU, immediately they switched to coal. So that is the possibility and the criticality also in terms of environment, that if the gas price is too high, a lot of countries, they can switch to a different kind of source, that is coal.
Yuri, I know that you've been, the forum has been crunching the numbers on global supply and demand. So what's your views on prospects for US LNG?
My thought is as follows. I think that fortunately there's a force that is a dominant force in front of us. I'm talking about the very market. So I think that the market will show who is right and who is wrong in this dispute about underestimations or overestimations of the US abilities as regards to natural gas and LNG. Speaking about GCF, you mentioned quite right, saying that GCF does believe in figures and does believe in statistics. So due to that, we are quite confident that from fossil fuels, natural gas is the fastest growing fossil fuel. And from the point of view of natural gas consumption, until 2040, the growth of natural gas consumption will be about 46%. That is in compliance with our long-term projection made and recently introduced to the general public in our global gas outlook. This is our flagship production. So I think that we'll encounter the stiffer competition between natural gas and coal, between natural gas and renewables, and between different sources of natural gas. I think that GCF member countries have got advantages and geographical advantages, technical advantages, and cost efficiency advantages. Due to that, I think that GCF member countries could feel comfortable in this competition. Speaking about Russian Gazprom and US LNG, I already said that from my point of view, the market will show and our consumers will show. And we will demonstrate their willingness and so on and so forth. That's why one of our priority objectives, one of our values, that is the ongoing steady dialogue between producers and consumers. I think that due to the mentioned dialogue, we'll come to some market and marketful conclusions in that field.
We've spent a great deal discussing supply, but of course there is the other side of the LNG and energy story, and that's the demand side. And of course, I mean, if you talk to gas and LNG people, the number one topic on their mind is China, because it has shown some incredible growth rates over the past year, and everyone was wondering whether that might be repeated this year. So, Mr. Al-Kaabi, what sort of signs are you hearing from the ground in terms of consumption in China for LNG for this year and going forward? Will we see some double-digit figures again?
I don't know if we'll see double-digit figures again, but there is definitely growth. You know that the Blue Sky really plan that they have put for China, and especially in the cities, is well on its way, and they have already announced that they want to grow to 100 million tons per annum. The growth of construction in their receiving facilities is unheard of. I mean, all over the China coast, they are building new LNG receiving facilities. So they're serious about growth in LNG due to environmental, really cleaning the environment, if you will, and the blue sky, the blue skies that they want in different cities, and they're very successful in that. But the growth is not only in China. I think that's the biggest, but also India has a huge growth potential, but is really limited by a lot of really legislative issues and also the infrastructure and pipeline requirements that are in there. But also you look at countries that are in the Indian subcontinent, you look at Bangladesh that has a huge growth potential, you have Pakistan, you have many others. But also a lot of people don't talk about this region. When you look at Saudi Arabia, for instance, I mean, they burn about 1.5 million barrels of oil and fuel oils and fuels in the summer just for electricity. If you look at Kuwait, I mean, Kuwait has already started building one of the largest LNG receiving facilities in the world, and they're going to be receiving LNG for their power to replace the crude and so on, for environmental and business reasons. You know, they're replacing crude. You look at Bahrain, you look at UAE, with the nuclear they're building, with the gas that we're still supplying under blockade, they need more. You know, you have a lot of requirement even in the region. You go to Jordan, Egypt is having some of its own that's being produced, and maybe my friend Descalzi here can talk about that, because he's developing for Egypt some gas resources. But I think the region in this area, in addition to Asia, has a lot of requirements. So gas has a big future. I think there is a big requirement. And I agree with Claudio regarding having a balance between, a range of price that's acceptable for us as industry to develop. Okay, to have projects that can be bankable, if you will, to develop, and for the consumer to have it, reasonable enough for them to be able to consume and build market.
But of course, in the middle of this beautiful planning on demand and supply side and pricing, you have like black swans events, where all of a sudden there is the China-US trade war. I mean, how much of a concern it is to you these days?
Yeah, for us, if I'm talking just on Qatar LNG side, it serves us to have penalties on US LNG. Because if you penalize US LNG, when China hits them with a tariff of 10%, I become more competitive. But I'm a believer that we should have free market, and we should have, really a trade of energy is the most important, I think, commodity to mankind. I mean, you need it for power, you need it for cooking, you need it for driving, you need it for basically everything in life needs energy, any form of energy. So I think having free trade of energy serves humanity in general. And I think it's important that we have that kind of, really, when we talk about World Trade Organizations and freedom of business and so on, I would like to see this as a free business for everybody to be able to compete, and really the competition should drive it.
But if it doesn't happen, you are telling us that you are gaining either way. So
no, if it doesn't happen, and there is a penalty on the US, it makes LNG. It makes LNG from the US less competitive. I mean, that's
a nice deal to have. Claudio, I know
I'm going to be developing in the US also.
Sure. Claudio, I know that you've signed a deal with Saad today, and you could possibly tell us about what the deal is and how did it go. And I know for a fact that Mr. Al-Kabi is a black belt in martial arts. I mean, how difficult is he as a negotiator?
25 years ago, you're talking
Still,
about.
it matters. Like Putin says, there are no former spies, so I'm pretty sure there are no former martial art champions.
Yes.
By the way, just to be clear, I mean, you have good information, but I think you didn't know that Claudio was a black belt in judo.
Fair enough. I want to see this negotiation process from the room.
The negotiation was quite peaceful, and we never had row on any problem. In any case, it's too strong for me, so I try to be on the safe side. We have why this deal? We have our other deal outside, because the strategy of QP is to expand, as Saad said. Expand is development, energy development outside Qatar to diversify. So we signed this deal in Mexico. In Mexico, we discover immediately big oil reserves, more than 2 billion barrels, with the first area, with the first license on 3 blocks. Now we have 6 licenses, and we already got the approval for the plan of development and the authorization a few days ago from our board for the development. So this deal is really an exchange of cooperation in terms of cooperation in a very broad view. It's not just that QP is a partner and finance with us the 35% that is stake the project, but is participate to the development. So there is a transfer of competencies and a full cooperation, training and working together. So that is the main steps. And we are together also in Oman on the block 52. We started together a few months ago, so that is something that is growing. And clearly, is outside the country, and we hope also inside the country, especially for the gas.
So you are aspiring to join the energy trains expansion in Qatar as they grow production from 77 to 110 million tons.
That is a hope. That is a hope. Clearly, is a hope because we believe in gas and we are a gas company, just not LNG pipes, and we develop a lot of gas for the domestic market. We deliver about 60 billion cubic meters to the domestic market in Africa, in other countries where we produce gas. So we are a gas player, not like clearly QP, but that's our hope is also to be able to have a stake and develop and give our competencies and work in Qatar, clearly.
Do you think he stands a chance, Mr. Al-Kabi?
You see, the selection of, we are well on our way on Northfield expansion. We have already everything set up, as I mentioned, I think previously to you, is that, you know, we have already announced it. We have all the contracts in place. We have tendered and we've received the tenders, the technical and commercial bids for 8 to 10 rigs. We're buying some long lead equipment. We're finishing the front-end engineering of all really the facilities by the first quarter of next year. So by the middle of next year, we'll be selecting some of the international companies to join us. The basis on selection is really best value for Qatar. So what can we get you know, in value for Qatar for anybody that wants to enter our projects or come into as a joint venture partner. We have already decided we will self-fund all the expansion, so we're not going for financing. And we have the technical capability to do it, and we have the reserves to do it, and we're well on our way. So we really don't need partners, but we like the model of having joint venture partners and having partners long-term and the JV structures that we've had in the past. So it's because we want to have partners, but also there needs to be a gain for the country. So what I'm looking for is the best interest of Qatar and those that give us the best value for Qatar, you know, in different forms that we will assess will be part of this. And definitely ENI stands a chance.
I will be taking the questions from the audience very soon. Can we get the mics out in the studio? But while people are thinking about the questions and we're getting the mics ready, Mr. Al-Kabi, may I ask you another question? You are wearing many hats these days. So you are the minister, you are the CEO, you are the president. You also have a role at the QIA, the Qatar Investment Authority, one of the biggest wealth funds in the world. So the budget figures are out for next year, and you are having a massive surplus of 50, even at oil prices of $55 per barrel. And in the next 2 years, you will have a massive LNG expansion to 110 million tons. So very soon, Qatar will be even more awash with cash. So the world seems to be running out of luxury hotels that you can buy in New York or London that you do not already control. So what are you going to be doing with this money?
Regarding, as I told you, we'll be fully funding our own expansions, so that's one way of spending money. But regarding QIA, I'm a board member and I'm chairman of the investment committee of QIA, but I don't talk about QIA because that's the job of the CEO of QIA to discuss anything related to QIA. But in general, I think just to answer your question, QIA is basically the sovereign fund. Sovereign wealth fund of the country, and its intention is to have savings and generated revenue for generations to come. It's not something where I understand you're saying some luxury hotels and some properties that have been bought by QIA, but that's only a small part of what QIA does. QIA has a very set strategy on diversity and having a diversified portfolio, whether it's in pharmaceutical, it's in you know, energy, it's in basically high tech and real estate. And others, banking and so on. So there are a lot of things, and some that appear a hotel when you buy it, it appears you bought a hotel. When we bought into Rosneft, you know we bought into a listed company. But there are a lot of things that we're doing that you don't know about. So there is a very clear strategy and a good strategy for the long term, for generations of Qatar.
It makes me very unhappy as a journalist that something is happening, but I don't know about it. So can we get the questions from the studio, please? Number 3, yes.
Yes,
can you introduce yourself, please? And we have about 10 minutes left, so let's try to keep the questions very short. Thank you.
Andrew Holland, American Security Project. My question is for Mr. Discalci and then open to the rest of you. You recently made an investment in a small fusion company, Commonwealth Fusion Systems, I think $50 million. How would something like that change the global energy system if that's successful? It's still 10, 15 years away, but if you're successful in getting a fusion energy system up and running, how would that change everybody's geopolitics and everything in the region? Thank you.
Thank you for this question, because we are working for the future. That means for the long-term future, and the electromagnetic fusion or nuclear fusion is a very long-term future. In the energy, the transition is always very long, because we are still using coal, we are still using biomass like 300, 400 years ago. So I think that also if the fusion will be successful, and it's something that we are going to see very soon in the next 3-4 years in terms of containment of the strong heat that we generate when there is a separation, and we'll see the first result in 15 years, and that means that the first impact will be on energy, so on the power. On power, on energy, but that means that it takes time, because we have to change a lot of infrastructure. So what we think that we need to complement the existing energy mix, and the first step for us is to work with gas and then with clean energy, because we are still using coal. Coal is responsible for about 14 gigaton of CO2 emissions, that out of the 32 gigaton that every year we produce as an energy system. So coal must be phased out, and we have to increase gas, and we have to think about the long-term future. Clearly, fusion is a big breakthrough, and we are working on that. We are working with the MIT and with our researcher, and we hope that it will work.
Right, number 2, please.
Thank you. Susie Billings, I do human rights advocacy. And looking at the longer term, we've had the UN publish its climate change report, and I appreciated, Mr. Al-Kabi, that you mentioned that with QP, you're investing not just for shareholders, but for Qatar as a whole, and not just returning those quarterly dividends. How much of looking at climate change impact is then influencing your bid process in getting people to be, when you're building or expanding to the North Field, of doing that in the best possible, less climate impacting way, and also with your foreign investments in building up even cleaner ways of producing energy? We're talking, the UN says we're at a 12-year crisis point if we don't change. What are we doing within the energy sector to be a part of that? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that this is a very important question, and one of our strategies really is energy efficiency and the environmental side, and we're building one of the largest solar power plants in Qatar as QP in partnership with one of our companies. One of the things we're doing is we're going to be announcing soon that we will be introducing for the World Cup 2022, replacing all the diesel buses with CNG buses to ensure that we have less particles in the air and clean up the environment, if you will, and use it as basically a springboard to try and really do away with diesel buses. As a CEO of oil and gas company, I'm one of the biggest promoters of looking at that. We are also part, ethane emission in our industry is something that's a very big thing. And we have signed up with a lot of the industry partners to look at this critically and actually measure the methane emission and see how we can capture it and do away with that as much as possible. When you talk about the Northfield expansion and everything we're doing in the oil and gas industry, we're very responsible people that have kids and have families and want to live in a good place. So all of us, what we do is we say to our engineers, we want to basically make sure we are going to the cutting edge of technology to have the least NOx, least SOx, least emissions possible that money can buy today. And there are limits technically that you can do, but we actually go all the way to buy the most expensive and make sure that we can do. So anything that's technically possible and that's available as really technology that is proven, we use. So if you look at Qatar itself, and I think there is a lot of blame on Qatar, or if you look at a lot of the articles talk about per capita emissions and things like that. It's very unfair because if you look at it, we're a small population. So any number you divide by 300,000 or 3 million, I mean, indigenous Qataris are 300 and the total population is 3 million. So any number you divide by 3 million is, doesn't look as good as other countries. But when you look at the effect of Qatar on other nations, and when we take LNG, that's the cleanest fossil fuel known to mankind, and we transport that, and we are between 5 to 30% of the gas that's consumed by countries that I will mention now. Japan, China, Taiwan, Korea, Thailand, Pakistan, India, Kuwait, Dubai. This is LNG, not pipeline. Dubai, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Italy, Spain, France, Poland, Belgium, Germany via Belgium, Holland, UK. We supply all these countries for them to have clean burning fossil fuel, okay, that they replace other fuels with. So I think we're doing our part environmentally as Qatar to clean up the environment.
I see Claudio and Yuri also would like to say a few things.
Yeah, a few things on this subject, because was one of the KPI, one of the technical issues we discussed with QP when we talk about our foreign activities, is really to have projects with a zero carbon footprint. And that was really starting from the basic design of the projects. That clearly we are covering the scope 1, because we are talking about the upstream activity. We are not talking about the scope 3, where we, as a ENI with other operator in the OGCI, we are discussing how we can impact the scope 3 through different ways. But one of the technical issues that we discuss with QP for the future development is really that, to operate with a zero CO2 emission on all our activities.
Yuri, please.
If you don't
Got
mind.
1 minute.
So speaking about environmental issues and environmental concerns, I would like to say that they are in the focus of our GCF attention and activities. I would like to say that just a few days ago, GCF as a whole, as an international organization, has been accepted as an observer to the United Nations Framework Convention upon Climate Change. And 2 days ago, I made, as the head of this organization, a statement in Katowice, Polish city, at the World Climate Congress. At the Congress, at the conference, I announced that the GCF started thinking about the GCF Climate Initiative on the basis of the participation of all our member countries in Paris Agreement and on the basis of the environmentally friendly, responsible business behavior of our industrial entities. And that is the core of the GCF Climate Initiative.
Well, I'm glad we had our last question about the environment, because clearly that's very high on your agenda. So I think we should be wrapping the session now. Thank you very much for the audience to the question, and big thanks to you, Mr. Alkabi, Claudio, Yuri, for such a frank and open discussion. Let's give a round of applause, please.